And at 10, moisture sensitive. One of the things that I find to be the absolute dumbest thing about not only these damned suits, but also the FNAF series in general, is how stupid it is that the springlock mechanisms inside the springlock suits fail with moisture. Sure, it explains why William gets springlocked because the room was dripping and whatever, the ceiling was leaking, and it makes everyone confused with Crying Child because he was crying. Despite that not being a springlock failure, everyone thought it was because he was crying and, you know, moisture. But in actual practice, that is a horribly flawed mechanic. Like, if me breathing and sweating is going to make the metal bits snap on me, why would I do it in a hot robotic suit? That seems like a horrible and stupid idea. Like, yes, okay, put me in a hot and sweaty environment that gets me killed if it gets wet. That's not a liability at all. I get sweaty wearing my freaking Doctor Strange costume, okay? Imagine a giant suit full of metal, okay? That would also be heavy as hell to walk around in too, only making the sweating worse. In at 9, designer. You see, there are a decent amount of people that for some reason think that these springlock suits were made with pure intentions. By William Afton. This kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that William started killing after losing his kids, but we know that that's not the case. Since thanks to the fast facts found in FNAF AR's files, we know that the Funtime animatronics were some of the first ones ever made, and considering the abilities of Baby and her comrades, we know that they were made in order to kill, meaning that even if the Springlock animatronics were the very first animatronics ever, it's reasonable to assume that they were also designed with death in mind, which explains multiple things. But honestly, if William made the Funtimes with death in mind, it's likely that he did the same with the Springlocks, you get me? And if you think that a suit that can snap at a moment's notice and shove pounds of metal, bars, cogs, gears, and chains and more into the same space as your body would be made with pure intentions, you should stop watching these videos and go to a therapist. Seriously. I have a number. In at 8, no bonus. The springlock mechanism is probably the most intuitive thing that FNAF's world invented. The ability to move robotic parts out of the way enough for a human to fit inside is nuts. And while it may be dangerous, we also drive over 100 kilometers or miles, whatever, per hour in huge metal death boxes, so we can't necessarily complain about it. And while yes, they have their faults, there is nothing compared to the ability to be both animatronic and suit. That's an incredible feat of technology, and I'm sure they play into it with the marketing. Like, I mean, we hear the Foam Guy tapes from FNAF 3 talking about these things, okay? And he never mentions a bonus or anything like that for you risking your life with one of these damn suits. And even if you end up getting springlocked, there doesn't really seem to be any compensation package for your loved ones. Hell, if you die, you may not even get your severance. Actually, maybe that's why they do it. Your family can file a lawsuit since, you know, you died on the job, but that's a lengthy court battle against a massive company with a serial killer who has yet to be caught at the front lines. It's not really gonna do much good for your fam. So the fact that you don't get a bonus if you get in one of these suits, let alone get spring-locked, no thanks. It's a red flag. Swipe left. And it's 7, required. The springlock suits themselves are an occupational hazard that they didn't really need to create. Like, these things are hella deadly, and both William and Henry allow for their employees to wear them. Like, goddamn, okay? Just make a separate suit for the animatronic characters, for the employees, okay? Like, the people who run your business. You know, they are the ones who make you the money, so, you know, they don't end up dying from robotic parts replacing their internal organs. OSHA would have been all over these goddamn suits if it was real in this universe, but apparently I guess it's not. And honestly, it's probably required by your contract to wear these suits at work. And if you refuse, you're probably gonna get fired, especially considering how they started getting ready to fire Jeremy because he saw Glitch Trap in Help Wanted. So why wouldn't they fire you for not wearing your suit if it's in your contract? Even if you claim it was to protect your life, they'd find another reason that you couldn't really fight against, so. Especially, you know, when a serial killer is the CEO. And at 6, implications. Now, while the term springlock is used in real life, it's totally different from the actual FNAF mechanism. I'm certain most of you got the whole springlocks are real line from Springlocks and You, How Not to Die Remastered. It's a thread on the FNAF wiki. However, actual springlocks are just locks that use springs, okay? From my research, what I gathered is that a springlock in real life is, in simplest terms, a spring lock. It's like if your front door's deadbolt was on a spring. Every other instance talking about real spring locks or just ends up bringing you back or quotes this page. So it's kind of circular logic, okay? You can't use evidence within the thing that you're trying to prove as proof that it is real. It's like plugging a power bar into itself. It doesn't work. You can't use the same article to prove that springlocks are real, okay? Because they're not. At least their game form isn't. But if the springlock failure was real, I think the implications of like all of this being real in general is like one of the worst things. You get it? Like it's definitely in the top 10. Get it? It's a little meta content joke for you because this is a top 10 list. It's in the top 10. Halfway through into number 5, comments. I've mentioned this in previous videos, mostly to explain why there won't ever be an actual real FNAF restaurant that you'll be able to walk into, and it still remains true since we're only getting a virtual diner that you can only order online. However, I think that one of the worst things still, and especially when it comes to these suits, is the goddamn comments about them. You want to know a comment that I saw yesterday? Well, yesterday for me as I was writing this, Wednesday for you. Okay, I saw someone say that they want to be springlocked. What? Why? Why would you want to be springlocked? Do you know how messed up that is? You're saying that you want to be killed by this thing? Because there's some hotlines that you should call. Like, why on sweet heaven's earth would you want to be springlocked? Do you know how absolutely agonizingly painful that would be? That would be one of the worst things imaginable, okay? Holy sweet Lord baby Jesus W. Christ. That would be one of the worst ways to go, if not the worst way. At least like as far as like actually could happen goes, I think at least, okay? Because like a volcano would suck, but it's a bit unrealistic. It's a bad idea, okay? Stop doing this. Stop saying this. Okay, talk to a doctor. And for Afton, I talked about how the implications would apply to like how everything in FNAF would have happened in real life if one of these was real, but one of the worst implications would be that Afton was real. This man has caused me enough pain and suffering already. I don't need him to be like an actual person, especially considering how Springtrap would be set loose next year. And then everything after it would happen. This channel would probably be a true crime channel and not a gaming channel. I'd probably have tried proving it myself and maybe even become a PI so that I can do so. But straight up, this man has already caused me enough grief and suffering and loss and tears of pain at night in my life, and it's made me lose enough of it already to him. So yeah, him being real would just be the worst thing that I can imagine for me. However, that's only if the springlock failure thing was also real. There are worse things for people in the FNAF universe though, not in real life, such as in at 3, paperwork. One of the worst things for the survivors after a springlock failure has to be the paperwork that is associated with it, because goddamn, someone dying in your building is one thing. Someone dying in your building because of something in your building is another, and then add on to that the fact that they were your employee and probably forced into that suit without because of their contract, and you'll be filing reports until you have to retire. Okay, especially because one mistake on those papers means like even more paperwork, and I don't really know anyone who likes to do paperwork. Personally, I hate it, but that's also because my ADHD makes me it makes it unbearable for me, honestly. Like, it's even tough to write scripts sometimes, but I mean, eventually I have to, but like that's where my brain thrives, you know, in that stressful environment, which is not good for my health. But if it was that kind of paperwork, I would honestly just quit, because there was no way in hell that I would even want to attempt to keep my focus on that when I can just scroll through TikTok or YouTube instead. So yeah, no thanks. But ultimately, in at number 2, replaced. Oh yeah, don't forget your bones being replaced with metal ones. Yeah, like sure, there's surgery for people who need repairs or replacements, okay? I think like hip replacements are probably the most common actually. However, those have whole processes behind them to ensure a fast recovery and, you know, survival, not being infected. All of a sudden being shoved full of metal bones where normal ones used to be, that's a guaranteed infection at the very least, especially considering how, you know, your normal bones have to go somewhere else. And whether they're just crushed and then spread out inside you or just pushed out the other side, you're going to be in a hell of a lot of pain. Plus, you know, probably not alive, which I guess is a good thing. since you won't really have to deal with the intense pain for too long, hopefully. But this actually makes me think, if you replace all of your bones with metal ones, are you still you? Is this like a Ship of Theseus moment? Am I about to have like a WandaVision finale? Or like, are we just our brain? And if we are our brain, does that mean that if we have a brain transplant, do we become another person despite it still being my body? And does that mean that we're just like a brain piloting a bone mech with meat armor? Oh no, existential crisis. And finally, in at number 1, death. I mean, don't get me wrong, okay? But the worst thing about a Springlock failure has to be the whole death part, right? Ignore my mumbling. I mean, honestly, okay, it's obviously not for some of you, given the whole comments thing earlier, but the only reason you wouldn't die in a Springlock suit is because you're a main character and need to be around for the story, and then you're just in agonizing pain for the rest of your life. Yeah, the only people who have survived a Springlock failure, well, confirmed, is William. So, yeah, and you know, he's like the main antagonist of the game and was only able to survive since the spirit of a victim was keeping him alive. And in the books, William also ended up getting springlocked before, but then got out of the suit, since Dave Miller, who is revealed to be William, has scars from a previous Springlock failure from before he becomes Springtrap in the books. So the only one who can ever really survive seems to be William, and he's survived it twice. Anyone else is boned, and personally I'd rather not die by having millions of small metal bits and several dozen large ones shoved into my body, trying to replace my body. I would rather die peacefully in my sleep with Chica's hand around my throat. In at 10, Robert Williams. Robert Williams was unfortunately the first human to be killed by a robot. Williams, who was an assembly line worker at Ford's plant in Flat Rock, Michigan, was killed on January 25th, 1979 when he was gathering spare parts at a storage facility at the plant, alongside a robotic arm that was lifting the heavier items. Williams was killed after the arm of the robot hit him as he climbed up to a shelf to retrieve some casts, and ironically, the robot was supposed to be the one retrieving the casts, but it kept giving wrong information regarding the number of casts left on that shelf, forcing Williams to have to climb up to count them. A jury determined that Williams' death was caused by lax safety measures, including one that should have caused the robot to make warning sounds when around a human, and the victim's family was awarded $10 million in damages. And a number of recommendations were made about improving safety standards when humans were working alongside robots, so that's something at least. In at 9, Kenji Arata. Kenji Arata was thought to be the second person killed by a robot, but the first Japanese man to be killed by one when he died at a Kawasaki Heavy Industries factory in Akashi, Japan in 1981. He was trying to repair the robot at the time of the accident until the robot pinned him against another machine and killed him. Attempts to free Arata from the robot's grip were unsuccessful. The robot had been taken offline for repairs and was separated from the other robots at the factory by a wire mesh fence, and it was supposed to remain shut down whenever anyone opened the door and entered the confines of the fence. Arata had, for some unknown reason, or at least a reason only known to himself, jumped over the fence into the area, therefore not activating the shutdown mechanism. His body rubbed against the machine and inadvertently switched it on, which caused it to come to life and pin him against another machine, which, yeah, yikes. In at 8, Junior Wheel Inc. At Junior Wheel Inc., a motor vehicle parts manufacturing company located in Norton, Ohio, an employee tragically lost their life in 2001 due to an accident involving a robot on the assembly line. As the employee was cleaning up their work area at the end of their shift, they accidentally entered an area of the assembly line where the robots had not yet been deactivated. The robot, mistaking the employee for a machine that needed to be assembled, grabbed them by the neck and suffocated them by pinning them under a wheel rim. While not exactly the same, the idea of being pinned by a robot and suffocating seems like how I'd picture dying from a Springlock failure. Most of this list isn't going to be exact one-for-ones, of course, since Springlocks don't exist in the real world as they do in the games, but suffocation would probably be one of the ways you'd suffer the most if you didn't die instantly from all the robot parts. The Springlock failures from the games being where the mechanism in the suits that holds back the robot parts enough for a human to use it as a costume break and allow the endoskeleton and whatnot to go back to where they'd be in animatronic mode. We haven't seen a true proper Springlock endo, so we can't really be sure about where the parts would go, but if they didn't end up replacing your bones or organs and killing you instantly, I think suffocation would be a main factor behind the death, because I mean, there's gotta be a lot around that area. And at 7, William Afton. I'm pretty sure that we all know this story by now, alright? Everything was going well at first. They couldn't pin him down, he was on his way to immortality, and then once William discovered Remnant though, he started to spiral. He wanted to use it for fuel and to make his life truly immortal, so in an effort to study it further, William lured the possessed animatronics to a back room that they couldn't access and dismantled them, planning to melt down their endoskeletons to make soul-infused metal. However, by doing this, he unknowingly released the souls of the victims that he had claimed oh so long ago, and, you know, they're ghost kids, so they scared him. He tried to scare them by fleeing into his spring Bonnie suit, which probably also made him feel more powerful, but his haste, coupled with the leaking in the room, because of course he didn't really care about the foundations of the place, causes the Springlock suit to fail, crushing him in torturous agony for the next 30 years. However, he didn't die from this. Of course, because he was being kept alive by the spirit of another victim. So he went on to live that agonizing pain for 30 years, but you know what? He deserved it. And you can't say that this doesn't belong on the list, okay? As the only actual Springlock failure to be confirmed as game canon, some are probably going to consider this the only one that should have been on the list, but hey, I make the rules. And at 6, Dallas police. On July 7, 2016, Micah Johnson carried out an attack in Dallas that resulted in the deaths of 5 police officers and injured 9 more officers and 2 civilians. The attack took place during a protest, and Johnson initially targeted 3 officers, killing them and wounding 3 more officers and 1 civilian. He then fled to El Centro College, where he attacked another officer before barricading himself inside and attacking some more. A standoff ensued, during which the police tried to negotiate with him, who threatened to set off explosives. The police offered him a choice to surrender or face the possibility of being confronted with force, and Johnson did not surrender. Thus, the police ultimately, using a robot equipped with a brick of C4, to get inside and, let's say, deal with the event. It did damage the robot though, but this marked the first time a police department in the US actually used a bomb-laden robot for reasons other than disarming a bomb. Yeah. Halfway through into number 5, Joshua Brown. Joshua Brown was the first person to be killed in a self-driving car accident. On May 7th of 2016, while driving a Tesla Model S through Williston, Florida, the car was unable to distinguish between an 18-wheel tractor trailer and the bright sky. As a result, the Tesla collided with the trailer, tearing off the roof of the car, and then crashed through 2 fences and a pole before coming to a stop. Tesla initially tried to deflect responsibility for the accident, pointing out that this was the first accident involving the Model S in 130 million miles of driving, which was below the industry average of 94 million miles, but Tesla also emphasized that the autopilot system was not perfect and required drivers to keep their hands on the steering wheel. However, investigations by the National Transport Safety Board revealed that Brown had his hands on the steering wheel for only 25 seconds out of the 37-minute trip, and neither he nor the autopilot applied the brakes. The airbags did not deploy until after the car had left the road and hit some trees, which I think is absolutely terrifying as well, but considering that the police found a micro SD card containing a Harry Potter movie at the accident scene, the driver of the truck claiming that Brown was watching a Harry Potter movie at the time of the accident, and 2 laptops being found in the car, this seems like more user error than a fault of the vehicle. And at 4, Devin. The story The New Kid from 1:35 AM, the 3rd Fazbear Frights book, revolves around Devin, Mick, and Kelsey. Devin and Mick are outcasts from their class, and they aren't really popular, you know, they aren't cool, but when the new kid Kelsey arrived at their school, they tried to make a new friend. Despite Kelsey being charismatic and adored by everyone in the school, over time, Devin ends up growing jealous because of that, you know, since Kelsey has everything he wants. So, in an act of revenge or in an attempt to gain control, Devin hatches a plan to lure Kelsey to an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's and trap him in a Springlock suit for a few hours. To try to humble him, I guess? I don't know. Why do you know what a Springlock suit does? Like, do you just chill in it for like an hour or 2? I don't know. Why do you know about this? Either way, the plan goes horribly wrong, and after getting in the suit, the Springlocks fail, as expected, because it's a FNAF book, and it causes the blood to soak into the fur of the animatronic, pull on the ground, you know, all the grisly scenes that you'd expect from this. Devin and Mick then leave Kelsey for dead so that they won't get in trouble, but then something doesn't feel right. So, a week later, Devin returns to the scene of the crime to make sure that Kelsey's body is still there. He sticks his hand in the animatronic's mouth and snap, a haha, the spring locks fail again, as per usual, and Devin gets his hands stuck inside the suit and bleeds out, but not before seeing that the body in the suit had black hair instead of Kelsey's blonde hair. That's the only other spring lock failure that we actually know happened, so yeah, I'm putting it on the list. Getting close to the end, in number 3, Lenko Inc. Lenko Inc is a company which makes the plastic products for a number of industries, including the clear plastic cases used in the packaging of CDs. You know, CDs are those they're like Blu-ray discs that you would get your dad for Christmas, but for music and not as durable. And the case is the stuff that people were cutting up to make hologram projectors out of with their phones. You know, you just place it on the screen. Yeah. Unfortunately though, one of the robotic arms used in this manufacturing process killed an employee at the factory back in 2007. According to accident investigators, the arm of the robot malfunctioned and moved unexpectedly, striking a male worker in the head and ribs, causing severe blunt force trauma. It was reported that the employee survived for 2 weeks in the local hospital, but eventually succumbed to the serious injuries. My brain to draw crazy parallels between that and Crying Child from FNAF 4, who had severe head trauma and died of his injuries in the hospital later on, which sends a chill down my spine, because that's yikes. But ultimately, in at number 2, Ramji Lal. In 2015, a robot at the SKH Metals factory in Manesja, India, caused the death of a 24-year-old Ramji Lal, an employee at the factory. The robot, which was used to lift and weld metal parts together, accidentally stabbed Lal in the abdomen while he was attempting to adjust a mispositioned metal sheet. Lal was taken to the hospital after the accident, but he later died from internal bleeding caused by the crushed ribs and abdomen. Despite initial reports suggesting that Lal may have also been electrocuted, an autopsy found no evidence of this and was ultimately determined that he died from the injuries sustained in the accident with the robot. However, the police reportedly stood by the death by electrocution, which is odd, and is way too close to the cops from FNAF, ignoring just the animatronics being compared to human corpses, like it wasn't a thing. I don't know why they were doing that, but again, it's obviously not the same thing, but definitely some interesting parallels that at least my brain can see. You probably can't, but you know what, I'm weird. And finally, and at number 1, Anna Maria Vital. In 2009, a malfunctioning robot at Golden State Foods in Los Angeles resulted in the death of Anna Maria Vital, a 41-year-old employee at the company. Golden State Foods was a major supplier for McDonald's, reported that Vital had been attempting to remove a box that was stuck in the machinery on the factory floor when the accident occurred. After freeing the box, the robot grabbed her, causing severe crushing injuries. Despite efforts by her colleagues to free her, Vital's injuries were too severe and she passed away a few moments later. Given that this was a death at the hands of a robot, crushing someone, being grabbed by an animatronic, and related to a fast food chain, this was extremely, frighteningly similar, at least in my brain, to the stories that we see coming from the FNAF games, especially in regards to Elizabeth Afton, who gets grabbed and crushed by Baby at Circus Baby's Pizza World, which is basically FNAF's McDonald's. Yeah, that's a thing. I'm sorry. In at 10, Elizabeth Afton. Elizabeth is at the top of this list because, well, she got killed, but she also doesn't really seem to deserve it until after she gets killed, and then she deserves the spring locking. Which, I mean, in a way makes sense, and it's something that I've been using as evidence when it comes to who I think the vengeful spirit is. Because, you know, spirits, when they're, being spirits for longer periods of time, would understandably start to go crazy, or even crazier, and this is an idea that Supernatural, the show, has used in length. And the same idea, though, could be applying to Elizabeth and Crying Child. Just because you start off good or loving your father doesn't mean that you'll continue to see things that way in a few years' time. And Elizabeth, while not deserving a spring locking in 1983 when she dies, definitely deserves